No, I think it's him. No.
Well, inshallah, we have lots of time. So,
Yeah, yeah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So we have a little bit of time now for some discussion, some conversation with Shaykh Yahya. I'm really honored to be seeing Shaykh Yahya again, teacher and friend. Inshallah khair, as many of you know, next week Sheikh Faraz and Sheikh Yahya will be together in South Africa. Many of you know, Sheikh Faraz left tonight with Sidi Nader, and we'll be doing a tour of Johannesburg, Durban, and inshallah Cape Town. And we'll also be joined by Sidi Amjad as well. So a proper North American seekers contingent heading over to Southern Africa, which will be very Mubarak. So I feel like this is the beginning of a few blessed weeks with Sheikh Yahya and his good company. So this is what we'll do in terms of questions and discussion. I'm always sort of interested in questions, comments, and concerns,
Yeah.
because I think it's important that when we engage with our scholars, and particularly scholars as relevant and as timely as Sheikh Yahya, that we also express our responses to it and how we feel that those things apply in our lives. So what we'll do is that we'll take a question from the brothers and a question from sisters at the same time, if that's okay, Sheikh Yahya. So we hear a number of voices,
Yeah,
and then inshallah you can comment and respond as you will. And I'm always, I think that's sort of the best way to do it. And like I said, as things sort of wrap around, I'll close with a closing question, which will serve as something that we'd like to record for the online academy in terms of advice from Sheikh Yahya to students who are taking courses online. For those of you, I'm sure you've been told over the course of the night, the online SeekersHub Global Academy courses are now open for registration. And mashallah, we know a lot of people have been registering and really interested. And there's a lot of beautiful courses, including Sheikh Yahya's courses that are going to be offered during this upcoming term. So we'll start with Sister Said. I see a number of questions. So why don't we take the question there, Sister Hajar, and then brothers will come over to you. Go ahead.
I was just wondering, in pursuit of a sound heart, is there any discussion amongst the scholars as to whether it's better to withdraw yourself from certain environments, maybe certain jobs or certain activities, to achieve that, or if it's better that you remain in that environment, Bay Street, Wall Street, whatever it is, and then try to seek, even though some of those environments make it very difficult, which is the better path, when you're pursuing that?
Great
Okay, we're
question.
gonna come back to that, and I'll repeat the question as well. And we'll start in the second row first.
Alaikum salam, marhaba.
Um, okay, so I have a number of questions, but should I give?
Give one. Then we can address it one by one.
Okay, so I'll just start with. Okay, so ostentation, right? So that issue, like, I mean, if someone has difficulty with that, what is the way to, like, who should we be, like, wujud and all those sort of concepts, right? Like, I mean, who should we be at every moment? Like, if we are very, like, if somebody's very aware of how they're being perceived at every second, they could be probably a good actor, they could be probably a good showman, but, how should we tackle that?
So it's two very powerful questions. One around, in seeking a sound heart, what kind of environment do we be in, and what kind of environments often do we remove ourselves from? We find ourselves in work environments, Bay Street, Wall Street, Sister Hodges said, which have an impact on our soul and our connection to Allah and His Messenger. Is it better to remove ourselves from those environments, or continue to be there? And what are some of the strategies that we have to deal with that reality? And then this question, very powerful question about ostentation
Yeah.
and being observed.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sheikh.
Am I being recorded still?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a laid back Californian. I kind of like to not be recorded so that we can be a bit more open. Once you're recorded, then there's always going to be certain things you don't want to say. And I do think that, honestly, the more and more that I travel and the more and more I spend time with people in different places, the more and more I value and appreciate these types of sessions. These are actually, I think, more important than the previous session. And I wouldn't mind actually having the entire session just be this. I find that sometimes there's no doubt that formal learning has its place. I spent a long time doing that, and I believe in that. But I think really, if we're really going to be honest with ourselves, that if we would all just kind of sit back, relax, everyone kind of have a few of these, make this the next SeekersHub investment, and have some good coffee, and I'm totally serious, and really relax, and just have conversations, and everyone just really get out what they're thinking about and what's on their mind. I find it's only when we really do that do we start taking the first step forward, if you want me to keep it real. And I think that, this is why I like retreats so much, because I think you can do that at retreats. And that one of the things that we found in retreats is that the best times in the retreats are the informal sessions, where you're just sitting with people and people are able just to speak and talk, and that oftentimes people don't have access to ask the questions they really want to ask. Because there's you could give a breakdown, a hierarchy of different types of questions. And if we break it down into 5 different types, that it's usually only kind of the first 2 types that people actually will even ask when there's other people around, or in a formal type setting. If an informal session, maybe they'll get to type 3, and maybe a few will have the courage to ask type 4. And then this is why I think that there also needs to be time for one-on-one engagement, so that people can ask those type 5 questions that they're totally embarrassed to ask in front of other people. But the reality is that they're going through the mind of 70 to 90% of the people that are there. And so I love these types of sessions. And both of your questions are related, because in reality, and this is something I feel very strongly about, this is the teachings of my teachers, and that the more and more that I become integrated and understand and live in the world in which we do live, and become in touch with people's realities, the more and more it reaffirms from me these core teachings that I received from my teachers. And they relate to the state of your heart in the world in which you live, your own world that you experience subjectively. In other words, that without the heart, there is no way to understand that your world as you experience it. There's no way for you to respond to the world in which you live as you subjectively experience it. And there's no way to be successful in all of that. It all gets back to the heart. In other words, is that a question like ostentation that relates to everything that you do, whether it be religious or worldly, and that it relates to your ability to do what it is that you do. And it relates to then the decision that you're going to make on how you're going to be active or passive in your own particular context. And I'll now answer each individually and then try to tie them together back at the end. Ostentation, there's 4 or 5 degrees of ostentation. If you include hypocrisy, which is outright hypocrisy, which is the worst, is that where you just don't believe at all and you're just doing things for other people solely. That's the worst. The second is where that you are doing it solely because other people are present. The third, and these are degrees of subtlety. The third is where that no one else, whether people are present or not, you still do it. But when people are present, you have more energy and desire to do it. The next degree of subtlety is that whether people are present or not, you still do it. Whether people that are then come or not, you have the same level of energy. But if people find out about what you did, that you become happy. So that if someone comes to find out that you gave out $10,000 in charity and you're happy about that, that's riyā. And the most subtle form of riyā is where you have expectations on how people treat you because you're a scholar or a worshiper or whatever, such that when you go out into public, that you expect people to send salams to you first or to make space for you up front. And if that doesn't happen, that you're troubled by that. So these are 4 or 5 degrees of riya, ostentation. And the opposite of ostentation is ikhlas, is sincerity, where you do it solely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the first step in overcoming ostentation is to understand the theory about what it is. And that pertains to understanding its reality, its true nature, and its asbab, the means, how that it seeps into the heart. And it's not until that you cut the core root causes of it will it ever fully be taken out of your heart. So that aspect of theory takes a little bit of time. That's an obligatory type of knowledge that you have to spend time learning, that in a few classes that you'll be able to understand what you need to understand, and then the real work starts after that, is how that you uproot that from your heart. And the way that you uproot that from your heart is that as you're aware now and you're looking over your heart and you see these thoughts, or you see that happiness come to your heart, or you have expectations for how people treat you, whatever degree of that ostentation that it is that you remind yourself in that moment that Allah sees you. The secret to overcoming ostentation is an incessant spiritual struggle where you exert yourself in reminding yourself that Allah Ta'ala sees you at all times and you're doing this for His sake. And that if you do that, even though at first it will be difficult and it will probably get the best of you, but if you do that, every time you do it, it becomes easier and easier and easier until it becomes the default state of your heart, is that you only do it for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. There's no way to overcome any of the diseases of the heart without spiritual struggle. And what happens is that in that moment when you see it rise to the heart, that then you bring to mind that Allah sees me, and that all that matters is that whether He's pleased with me or not. It does not matter what this person thinks. You remind yourself of that reality. And if that's too vague or abstract for you, that you have to spend time then proactively that being in a state of muraqabah and getting to that state, so that when you remind yourself of muraqabah, that the meaning will penetrate into your heart as opposed to an intellectual block being there. And that takes a little bit of time, and you can study like a chapter in a book like the Book of Assistance to teach you about muraqabah, to get over that hump as well. And then that, if you do this consistently, that it will be taken out of your heart. And then you have a quick route, which is to be around the awliya and the righteous. And this is why, to me, that this is the single number one most important thing that we need in our communities, are awliya, salihin, people who have actualized this deen, that when you sit with them, is that the knots of these diseases just become unraveled even without spiritual struggle. And there's a reality to that. As for the question of the sisters, is a really good question. And I can't answer for you specifically, but I can give you principles. And that the principle states that theoretically there is no situation that a Muslim could be in, theoretically, except that they would be able to respond to that situation in a way that was pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within the realms of the halal and the haram. In other words, is that theoretically, that you could have one of the great awliya of Allah be a politician. There's nothing theoretically that preventing, with the most expansive understanding of the halal and haram, of there being a great awliya who's involved in politics and maintains his principles, theoretically. Now, generally speaking, that some jobs or occupations or places that you find yourself in are much more difficult to uphold a higher level of istiqamah and uprightness than others. This is the fact of the matter. And then that's in general, and then for some people, some are more difficult than others. And so that theoretically, there's nothing preventing anyone from being in any situation, and that maintaining your istiqamah and your uprightness before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and doing what is right. There are a few prerequisites to that, yes, of that having an adequate amount of knowledge on how to navigate so that you can do what is right, and then having traits of heart that enable you to do that and put that into practice. Those are prerequisites that you have to train yourself in. And I think that it's in relation to the prerequisites that will help you answer the question of that, do I isolate myself from that, or do I not, and to what degree and for how long? And that there's no doubt that isolating yourself for periods of time is from the sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ. He did this just before he received revelation, as we know in the hadith of Sahih Bukhari, is that he would go for nights on end, and he would be in a state where he would be in a state of worship. كان يتحنث في غار حراء, أي التعبد. He used to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even after receiving that revelation, that there was times where our Prophet ﷺ would be in a state of solitude on a daily basis. In particular, that he would generally wake up from about what would be modern day 11:30 to 12:30 at night, and that he would pray into the last 6 of the night, rest, and then wake up to the adhan of Sayyidina Bilal. And so that our Prophet on a daily basis would be in a state of worship Allah Ta'ala, in a state of solitude, or that he might have been in the chamber with one of his blessed wives, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But then even that at a larger scale, that after receiving prophecy, he would make i'tikaf in the last 10 days or last sometimes 20 days of Ramadan. So even the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there's a hadith, although in its weakness, you don't necessarily quote this in larger gatherings, but in smaller gatherings like this that you can, is that there's that, and the Sufis tend to like to quote this hadith, that it's reported that our Prophet said is that there is a time that there is that not it's not possible to be around any other people except with my Lord. That there's a time that I have to be alone with my Lord, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so that solitude is a very important thing, that on a daily basis, and that people to various degrees that need to have periods of solitude in order to learn what they need to learn and to make firm within them the realities of the deen, so that when they go back into those environments, is that they can uphold a higher degree of istiqamah. And now, those are just some general principles. There's a lot more that could be said. How they relate to each person differs. Generally speaking, a lot of people can't just say take a year off, or 2 years, or that I'm going to Mauritania, or I'm going to wherever. Most people can't do that. And so these types of people never, ever, ever should despair. That know that if you put in that spiritual struggle, and that you have a strong intention, and you have resolution, Allah will give you everything that you need in the situation that you're in without having to move at all. At all. And in that regard, that never, ever let yourself despair. That even if you think that you need to go into a state of solitude, or you need to retreat for a period of time, but you can't, make your solitude 5 to 10 minutes a day before bed and turn to Allah with your heart. And if you do that, wallahi, you will find a response from Allah immediately. And you will find divine insistence in your life. And that, and if you can within that as well, from time to time, retreat and to learn whatever on a weekly or monthly or yearly basis. At the RAS, for instance, that you attend the week, whether it's before or after, or that the Seekers is having a retreat, that you attend that, whatever it might be. Or let's say that you have an opportunity to, spend a year learning Arabic or going to a program somewhere. Those are great things to do, or to spend time in a place. And I would say in that regard, use your time wisely. Use your vacation time, if you have it, that to do something like go visit a sacred place like Fez. Go visit a sacred place like Istanbul, Turkey, like Tarim, Yemen, like all of these beautiful places that still exist in the Muslim world, where you can have powerful experiences that are going to shape you and help you, that get back into everyday life. So it doesn't mean that it's not difficult. We all struggle with it, everything that you're saying. And those are just some basic principles. And if there's any follow-up or add, if people have any other questions, or if Sayyid Abdul Rahman wants to add, please.
I know there's 2 other hands up from sister side, so we'll take both those questions, and then we'll come back to the brother side. And we'll try to do another round before we conclude. So I saw 2 hands. Go ahead. Wa alaikum salam.
You mentioned that we've all inherited a decentered world. If you were to mental analysis at distance from our fitra, why are some of us more likely to suffer from, let's say, anxiety disorder, depression, bipolar disease more than some others?
That's an important question. And there was a second hand right across. Was it at the back? Yeah. Go ahead. Okay, we'll take those 2. We'll take a third one as well, because I see another hand. Sorry, brothers, we're coming to you. Don't worry.
I just wanted to maybe get your advice on, from the perspective of an educator, the responsibility towards children and perhaps even as a mother, the responsibility towards children and for instilling this idea of family
Mm.
teaching the child through the years that maybe would have a grounding in.
No. Let's take those three, then we'll come back to the brothers for a full round. So the three questions, just to repeat, was one about you spoke about living in a decentered world and the connection of that, particularly to the rise in anxiety and mental illness and so on. And I think Sister asked a very pertinent question, I think, that many people struggle with around the proclivity to some of these illnesses and diseases and some of the strategies to sort of understand and contextualize that within an Islamic framework. If I can just sort of readjust your question a little bit and to bring it back into that space, I think it's a really vital question, something that comes up so often, I think, in conversations now, and something that we deal with in our own families and in our own communities amongst our friends. The question about apathy and the challenges of being apathetic, particularly coming after the month of Ramadan, seems like the sort of the question on all our minds is, how do we not fall in? How do I not fall into those same patterns that make us distant from the things that we need to do? And then finally, Sister Ifit's very pertinent question about soundness of hearts and education and children. Being a father and teacher yourself, would be wonderful to have that perspective. So feel free to address it as you will.
These are amazing questions. May Allah bless you all. These, the nature of the questions you ask is a testimony to the nature of the person asking. So these are very, very good questions, and I'll do my best to touch on them and that offer some insights, in no way claiming that they'll be definitive or even fully convincing. I really believe this idea of the decentered world is really, really important that we all study, because it's shocking to find out from people how little we know about that in a post-Enlightenment, post-rational scientific revolution, post that Protestant Reformation world, post-nation-state world, that we have to know how this happened. And we ultimately, that the knowledge that we receive, for the most part in the world, is Western knowledge, and is a part of a very long, drawn-out process that is highly charged with a long list of underlying assumptions about the nature of the world that are not neutral. And we are inheriting all of that just by being Western, and increasingly the world is becoming more and more Western, not in the geographic sense and the figurative sense. And that it's essential that we know about this, or else we will be trapped into certain cognitive frames that will limit our ability to understand the world, that according to the way our Prophet taught us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And without doubt, there are a number of consequences of inheriting this world. That there's no doubt, the more decentered that you become, that the more unstable you become. The more unstable that you become, the less ability that you have to withstand. And that withstanding all different types of things that would compromise any dimension or aspect of your health, whether that be spiritual, religious, whether that be intellectual, rational, whether that be mental or psychological, whether that be emotional, whether that be physical, whether that be social, or even environmental. All of the different possible types of health, to the degree that you become decentered and destabilizes, to the degree that you become more susceptible to all those different types of health. And so that it's not just about mental illnesses. And I think that we've done very little work on that as Muslims. And I think this is an example of one of the many other areas that we need to do a lot of work. I've been ordering books on mental health from the Catholics, and that they've done a lot of work on this, categorizing different mental illnesses, and that to what extent are they legally responsible, not legally responsible, that what is the nature of this illness, and that attempting to understand them through their Catholic worldview. And there's many benefits in this for Muslims, because there's a lot of overlap. There's only, I think, 2 books that I have written by Muslims or groups of people that are Muslim that are really starting to tap into this. And I think that it's really, really important that there's not a lot that I can say specifically about mental illnesses and categorizing different types of ones, except in very general, painting general broad strokes, is that there's a reality to mental illnesses. There's no doubt. They're not all jinn. right? Unfortunately, that we still are trying to get out of this in the community, that people think that you have a mental illness and there's a jinn in you, right? Yani, that is ridiculous, right? Yes, there's a reality to jinn, and jinn can cause mental illnesses, but not every mental illness. There's a reality to mental illnesses, just as there's a reality to all of these different other types of illnesses, many of which are spreading very quickly. I mean, we have every year new different types of illnesses that are a byproduct of the modern world. And I think that we have to understand that whether they be of a mental nature or a physical nature, that whether we're being afflicted with increased levels of depression, or whether we increase levels of schizophrenia or becoming bipolar, or whether it's some type of other physical that sickness, it's all from the same ilk, in the sense that these are all byproducts of a decentered, destabilized world that was not created at the hands of Muslims, which is a very important philosophical point that we have to understand very clearly. Now, how do we understand all of that? The greatest thing that brings us solace in that is to know is that corresponding to all of these different types of illnesses and sicknesses and tribulations of all different sorts is an increased mercy of Allah. There's no doubt. Is that the more that we're tried, the more mercy that we receive. The more difficult things are, that the more the Sharia, which is the outward dimension of the religion, it becomes flexible, and the more mercy that we receive from our Lord. And that it's a hadith, and some say it was from the Tabi'een, but the meaning is correct either way that you look at it, is that it was said to the companions, you were living in a time that were you to leave 1/10 of what you've been commanded to do, that you would be destroyed. There's a time coming upon my ummah where they to do 1/10 of what they've been commanded to do, they will be saved. It's the opposite. And this is the time that we're living in, is that things are extremely difficult to understand, to do, to respond to, and so forth and so on. So we have to understand that with these difficulties is that there's a corresponding degree of mercy that comes from our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's what I would mention about that. And that the principle still remains is Allah will never take someone to account with more than they can bear. And that the key in all of these responses to any type of evil or any type of this all ties into this idea of theodicy, is that I highly recommend that people read Shaykh Nuh's article on that, that's Suffering and Divine Wisdom. He goes into great detail, and I think it's a very thoughtful, good argument put forth to arm Muslims to deal with this intellectual issue. And for the most part, this has not been our problem of ours theologically for centuries. This is more of a Western problem for certain reasons. And I think that we cannot let the baggage of another civilization become our baggage. And this is what being trained in UC Berkeley in the classes of Hatem Bazian and others, Dr. Hatem and others, that I do think is important that we bring this to the forefront, that there's an attempt of Western civilization that they're going through their own identity crisis and a lot of problems for them to put their problems on the rest of the world. Now, I'm not absolving Muslims. We have our own issues, and we should be aware of that. We don't blame others. We deal with our own issues. But in the intellectual world, there's an attempt to do this, is to make other people think like they are the problem, when actually they are the problem. And so we don't have to inherit that other people's problems. Let them deal with their own problems. And I say us and them. We are they, and we are us, and we are them. That we're all here together. But we have a very unique, clear-cut way of viewing the world. And for the most part in Islamic history, that we've understood the problem of theodicy in a very clear fashion. That the problem of evil is not difficult to understand from an Islamic perspective. And so that there is good works that we can read on that to help us deal with that in a much more nuanced fashion. Apathy, I was blessed to meet Hassan Lagai Eaton, rahimahullah, just before he passed. And I asked him for advice, and he said that, when he was growing up in the 60s and the 70s, that he says there was people had a lot of hatred. They were very antithetical towards religion. He says one of the things that he found of our time is that there's just apathy. People are apathetic. They don't care anymore. They don't care enough to even not like something. And I really think that that's the state of affairs of our time. And I think that if we're going to treat something like apathy, we have to look at what are all the causes. What is leading us to all become apathetic? What is it about the nature of the life that's lived in our time that causes us to become apathetic? And then I'm sure that if we brainstormed for a few minutes, we could think about causes. And this is an example of something that this would be a great thought exercise and a reflection exercise. Well, we would just to pause and like, what does cause apathy? And if we could identify what those things are that cause apathy, then that we could cut them off and we could replace them with things that cause the opposite of apathy, right? So apathy is the lack of care. Concern and care is the source of everything. This is the essence of the Prophet ﷺ, to the extent that Allah says that لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِئُ نَفْسَكَ. It is almost as if that you are about to kill yourself out of grief. You are so concerned, Ya Rasulullah, not only for yourself and your state before Allah, but for other people, as you're about to kill yourself out of grief. And so one practical way, there's no doubt, that of combating apathy is to become intimate with the remembrance of dhikr, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that sending salawat upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that starting that a process of reflection exercises. And reflection is really key, because that not caring, that you could replace that with that learning to love deep wisdom. And if you develop and cultivate within yourself that a thirst for wisdom, and that you cultivate in yourself an ability then to start to read the book of creation and to start to understand the wisdoms of what Allah Ta'ala has created, and you think about reflection is one of the great ways to overcome apathy. And one of the ways that you can shock yourself at first is to really seriously think about death. By Book 40 of the Ihya, which has been translated by Shaykh Abdul Hakim Marad, the Remembrance of Death and the Afterlife, and for a series of 40 days, read one of the sections on death. Read a page about death for 40 days. And it's very difficult to remain apathetic if we really know that, oh my God, I'm going to die very soon. In any moment, I could die. And then after the shock treatment, we're okay. Then we start reflecting on other things. And that again, in the Book of Assistance of Imam Haddad, there's a very beautiful section, it's been translated in English, about the various objects of reflection. And so I would say reflection, that annihilating ourselves in the sunnah of our Prophet, sending salawat, making dhikr, these are all practical ways to combat apathy. And I would say as well that a lot of these areas are there for people to to study. I don't know, I wouldn't be able to list all the reasons, root causes of apathy. I think we need to think about that. But there's no doubt in my mind that sensory overload could definitely lead to apathy. Right? There's no doubt in my mind, because that if you see so many images, that you see a nice juicy cheeseburger, and then the next frame is like a child suffering, and then it switches back to something of entertainment value, and then you're back to the football game that you're watching. And it's like, or whatever, not that they don't have commercials like that, but I'm just saying, like, this happens when we watch TV, is that you could watch a horrible thing on the news, and then someone's like partying, and it's like you become apathetic just because of the nature of that medium and the sensory overload that is, so that things of that nature. And I think too that even things like the creation of the suburb, the creation of the suburb is a product of the 20th century. People didn't live in suburbs before. It was only after the invention of the car, the Model T car, that the first suburbs started to appear, that in like the 1915, 20, 1930s. Because people before either lived in the city or lived in a rural environment. They didn't commute into the city for the most part. The idea of living in a suburb and having an hour commute is a product of the modern world. And if you're distant from people's problems, that creates apathy. So I'm sure we could think of a number of other things, and then we combat that. That we force ourselves to go down into the inner city and to help the homeless. We force ourselves to that care about, humanitarian concerns and so forth. That's just what comes to mind. Allah knows best. I know these are long-winded answers. Please forgive me. Sister, your question about education, inculcating the absolutely. I saw these really interesting things my wife showed me on that. These were short videos where people, there was a group of people who were taking key concepts of the Ihya al-Madin and putting them in video form. Did you see those? Have you seen some of those? What are those called? Do you remember the title of those videos?
No, but they're doing like a whole series where they're taking all the translations
Yeah,
of the Ihya
yeah,
and then dumbing them down basically by like if I took a translation and I was reading it to Isa and I was reading it in a way
Right.
that he could understand and
Right.
then just making storybooks out of it.
yeah. And so things like that I think are really effective, and that there's no doubt in my mind that children have to be raised with a deep, profound understanding of the importance of the heart. This is the essence of the deen. And in terms of actions, of how the parents deal with them, and so that and they have to be taught, like, for instance, I'll give you an example. We have, and this broadly relates to what's at hand, we have a policy at home, is that if they tell the truth, they don't get in trouble. If they tell the truth, they don't get in trouble. Did you hit your brother? Look, if you tell me the truth, you're not going to get in trouble. Right? Or there'll be just moderate, repercussions and disciplinary actions. But things like, all of the virtues of the heart, this is what is most important. That you inculcate this in them. And that something happens that it's an opportunity that you teach them about that specific thing that happened. You use it as an opportunity to teach them about the importance of the heart. And then they hear that they might comment on something or someone. And then they hear you say, the most important part of the human being is their heart. Maybe that they intended something else. That you teach them that from early on, that even though that someone that doesn't wear the headscarf or someone doesn't have a beard, maybe their heart's in a good state. And that you teach them tolerance, that you teach them that, yes, outward conformity to religion is important, but the heart is also important. So that unfortunately that oftentimes parents, their only concern is the outward dimension, and that they reinforce that by, that's what they get angry about when that's violated. And so that I think that one of the great ways to inculcate that in your children is that you be balanced in that regard. And you balance the outward with the inward. 'Cause in reality is that we should become that more concerned about the inward. Because how many people have we all know is that the focus on the outward, when that's just shoved down people's throat, there's very few things that push people away further from the religion than that. And so that I think that, teaching them the theory of the heart, teaching them about the heart with ways like this. Sister Aisha Gray Henry is working on a children's series of the Ihya al-Madin. I highly recommend everyone gets that when it's published, and teach your children these stories. And until that's published, I don't know, maybe it has been published, that finding creative ways, and I'm sure that other mothers here in this room would be much better at answering that question of practical ways. But in a combination of these various things, that it's essential that we teach them these things right from an early age.
We'll take a last round of questions from the brothers. I'm keeping an eye on the time, so I see Sidi Sufyan up front. Any brothers at the back? Do I see hands at the back? Brothers awfully
Apathetic tonight. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, we're gonna go Sidi Sufyan, and then the brother in the second row for his second question. And is there a third? Do I hear an eager Banu Hashim? Okay. Bismillah. Go ahead, Sidi Sufyan.
So,
How should we deal with bad thoughts? Should we expel them actively, or should we just ignore them? What is the best way?
Deal with, sorry, say that again, Sidi Sufyan.
How should we deal with bad thoughts?
Bad thoughts.
Should we expel them actively, or should we just ignore them?
And Sidi, in the In the second row, yeah, your chance for question number 2.
Okay. So, if I may, I'll just tie up all the questions in a very brief.
Give me one. Give me one meta question, just
Yeah, sure.
or meta comment.
Yes. So, it's about the difference right now between perennialism and traditional Islam, if you understand it that way, and pluralistic societies, which, like, say, say that that's how it should be. So, what's the big picture for in a practical, constructive way of establishing a social framework, operative framework? So can non-Muslims be considered mu'mineen, like in that's a non-Muslim mean, but can they be considered mu'mineen if somebody has a belief in Allah? Like just a very basic thing. And lastly, the body, most coarse body. Why is there this division of the mind and the heart, like faculty? Like if you look at the cosmos, those sort of questions, like or if you have some inner if you've read up any inner things of that sort. So lastly, and dunya and alam, what's the difference between those two? So that's it.
I'm going to take one. I'm going to take one more question, but don't feel that you need to address everything.
Okay.
Address the things that you feel that you can address best of the time.
What time do the lights have to be turned down?
Oh, I mean, we could stay till 2 a.m, but I have mercy on you, as much as on everyone else. Go ahead, Sidi, at the back. Last but never the least. Bismillah. So we have sort of a range of questions. I think Sidi Sufyan speaking about this very practical idea of bad thoughts, and how does one deal with them, ignore them, meet them head on. Then a range of questions about the challenges living in a plural society with a range of different beliefs, and how do we approach those of different beliefs within a framework of deen. And then, of course, this sort of challenge, right? This challenge that Allah has given us around the heart and the mind, right? This continuum, but it's also a tension. And we've had, some of our other scholars, and I know Dr. Fuad Nahdi these days often speaks a lot about this. That sometimes that our attention has been on the spiritual needs, but as we enter this age and this time, there's a lot of serious intellectual questions that are coming up that don't seem to be answered, and that's leading to a sense of confusion, and also a sense that Islam is inadequate in sort of dealing with some of the intellectual challenges of the day. Right. So I think that's a really pertinent question. And then the final question about, and I think almost like a great concluding question around this question of discipline, and this question of how do we build that discipline to inculcate the kinds of things that you've been talking about tonight,
Okay.
these steps that we need to take
Okay.
in our life to achieve, inshallah, these openings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
طيب. MashaAllah. Isa is such a good boy, MashaAllah. Isa, Habibi. Isa, you can come lay up here if you want, Habibi. You can lay up here if you want. Can we get you a pillow? You need a pillow? MashaAllah, he's such a good boy. We've been keeping him late tonight. Thoughts. Yeah, thoughts. This is fard ayn. Knowledge is of an individual obligation. It's very important we understand thoughts and how they're understood within an Islamic context. Very quickly, there's 4 different types of thoughts. There's different ways that we can determine each one of those thoughts. There's different ways that we deal with each one of those thoughts. But generally speaking, depending upon whether it's a thought from the nafs, the ego, or from shaitan of a demonic source, or from an angel, which are the 3 main types of thoughts, we respond to it in a slightly different way. If it's a demonic thought, that yes, you turn away from it, and that you replace it with the remembrance of Allah. The beautiful thing is if it is a bad thought, that if you dislike that thought, it is a kafara. It is an atonement for that thought. And you don't dwell on it. Shaitan wants you to dwell on the thought. Your nafs wants you to dwell on the thought. That you replace it with another type of thought, a good thought. And this is why we say, A'udhu billahi. Even when before we recite the Quran, you're reciting the Quran. But you say, A'udhu billahi min shaitanir rajim. You think deeply about the meanings of the isti'adha. That you don't see shaitan, but he sees you. You're seeking refuge in Allah, who only has power to protect you from shaitan. And so that you seek refuge in Allah and you preoccupy yourself with dhikr. Or that if it's repetitive and it's bothering you, you preoccupy yourself with something mubah, something permissible. Go out and get ice cream, speak to your friend, go out and do something else to prevent yourself from being bothered by that thought. If it's a thought from the nafs, which is repetitive, do this. It thuds in your heart time and time again. The key is that if you follow a thought from the shaitan, he passes you on to other shayateen. If you follow that thought, he passes you on to other shayateen. Every time that you follow a thought from the nafs, it becomes lodged in your heart more. Its roots grow deeper. Its roots grow deeper to where you just almost can't not do that thing. Double negative, sorry, Abdurrahman. But you have to catch it in the beginning. And this is why it's so important to lower your gaze. Is that if you see something that's, you shouldn't be, khalas, immediately lower your gaze, and you move on. Astaghfirullah, and you move on. If you start thinking about things and it solidifies and think. So you have to turn away from the thoughts of the nafs as well. But the main way that you quell those thoughts is with the remembrance of death. That's what is beneficial in defeating the thoughts of the nafs. But also, if that becomes difficult for you, that battle, that you open up things, that you develop hobbies of permissible things like coffee, like spending time with good people, like hiking and these types of things, sports. And this is why I think in our time that it's so important that things that in a previous time, actually, if you look at what some pre-modern scholars said about sports, that you'll find this in the books, and I'm saying this to make a point, that anything that is a non-martial sport that is haram, you'll find that in some books of fiqh. But that was in their time. In our time, that we have to use sports, and even beyond sports, anything that's in the realm of the permissibility and the broadest understanding of the deen, just to keep people within the realm of the deen. That's really where we're at, and we have to be honest with ourselves. As for your questions, I need to finish my PhD before we write a book for your questions. Your questions, Habibi, require a book. There's no doubt about that. And I'm going to have to remind myself now, as the night goes on, what was the first part of the question?
I'm speaking about the idea of pluralism and living in...
Yeah, so you brought up a whole bunch of different terms here. Perennialism, traditionalism, pluralistic society. These are all different types of terms, and I know what you're getting at when you bring them up, is that yes, we live in a pluralistic society. And that is it a prerequisite of living in a pluralistic society that we have a perennialistic that way of viewing the world, so that we can interact in a way that's suitable in the modern world? I mean, the simple answer is absolutely not. That it's totally inconceivable that with a basic logical analysis is that any aspect of the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ will be irrelevant or incompatible to any that time, whatever that time might be. Does it mean that there would be tension? There could be tension. But does it mean that's incompatible? That's inconceivable, impossible. This is the Prophet sent to all people. And so what remains is that people's understanding. And I think that one of the things that I found, unfortunately, is that a general trend that Muslims are very apologetic. And we have very, very deep set inferiority complexes within us. I subscribe to a magazine titled First Things, and they're a very traditional Catholic. They put forth a very traditional Catholic conservative understanding. They're very American, very patriotic, but very Catholic, and they're not afraid to be very Catholic, and they're not afraid to have their stances on abortion, to have their stances on same-sex marriage, to have their stances on whatever it might be. They're very comfortable, and that, to a certain degree, very accepted, despite the fact that a lot of people disagree with them. My point is that this is just an example, and there's many examples of people where I think that one of the most critical mistakes that we can make is to think that we have to somehow depart from the traditional understanding of religion. What I mean by traditional in this sense is that certain creedal points that have been passed down generation after generation that comprise a category of knowledge that is known as the thawabat, the unchanging principles that can't change. I think that if we waffle on these things, it's the worst thing that we could possibly do for ourselves and the world in which we live. Now, what are the solutions to that? There's a lot of details here, and these require a lot of thought and a lot of very intelligent people, and there's no way in 2 minutes that we're going to be able to even start touching on that. But to me, that again, getting back, touching kind of like on the sister's question, that do I have a problem as a traditional Muslim? What I mean by that is committed to a traditional Sunni creed that believes is that the Prophet's Sharia is nasikha, and it abrogates all of the other sacred laws that came before it, right? And that we believe in heaven and hell, and we believe that there are people going to hell. Does that prevent me from being an American Muslim that might interact with politicians or might interact with people from the ghetto on the street and anywhere in between? Absolutely not. And to me, I really deeply feel that if we have the right state and we have the adequate knowledge, is that if I honestly felt that if I could go into a crack house and I would be safe and I wouldn't be harmed myself, but I could be a means of hidayah, I would go. If I felt that it would be beneficial and that I could deliver the right message and be safe in my deen, I would go to the White House, and I would go to anywhere in between. And that's what I believe. And to me, whether it be a person next to me, whether they be gay or whether they be straight or whatever they might be, that in the end of the day, I treat everyone as a human being. I believe what I believe, but I treat everyone as a human being. At a certain level, it's very simple. And I have every right as a human being, as a Muslim, and as a citizen of a modern democratic, pluralistic, liberal society to believe what I want to believe about what is right and what is wrong. When we talk about separation of church and state, that's only to a certain degree. There's no doubt that religion affects. How come a senator can have a belief that he's a Catholic and the only reason he takes that position is because he's a Catholic, and that's acceptable, but a Muslim can't do it? That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous, and we can't waffle on that. And that we have to bring our unique positions to the table. And to me, the question really is, and this is why, people that really are good at thinking about these things, I'm just a beginner and only know talking points, is that I believe, like what Sidi Abdul Hakim Murad says about this is true. Can liberalism tolerate Islam? It's flipping the question. I think that's really the question. And I think that we've proven ourselves over time to be one of the most tolerant societies in human history. Now, at the advent of modernity, what does it mean to have our traditional principles be translated into the modern context? That's a major question where we need teams of great scholars to find the nuances between that having a static adherence to tradition or falling into modernism where we start to change. And that the balance between the two is very slight, and that it's a very difficult question. But in terms of the realm of personal interaction, it's very easy. That you maintain your beliefs, but you interact with every human being. And the whole point that we've been sent is to help people. And if you have your heart filled with the prophetic mercy, you don't live dichotomies. You can break through a lot of these dichotomies. The difference between the dunya and the alam, the dunya generally has a negative connotation. The dunya is the lower world. That the alam is the cosmos. It's from alam, alama, sign, right? It relates to the Greek meaning of the cosmos being the ornament. It's like an ornament. It points to Allah's oneness, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the difference between those two. I don't know about your other question there.
Final question.
But discipline, this is one of the things that, if you want me to, can I be honest? I'll be honest. This is one of the things that's, if I say something's kind of bothered me since I become Muslim, it's this issue. I've always felt at times that, not at times, from the time I became Muslim, the Muslims were very undisciplined, unfortunately. I guess I'm very disciplined by my nature. I'm German. My grandfather did his books by hand even after calculators were invented to the end of his life. My mother, if her checkbook is more than 5 cents off, she redoes the entire thing to balance her book. So it could be my German nature. But I've always, ideally, we're supposed to have the perfect balance. We're supposed to have the discipline of the Buddhists and the spirituality of the Christians. We're supposed to have the law of the Jews and, the wisdom of the traditions of the Far East. That we're supposed to have the fitrah of the Bedouin and the sophistication of the city dweller. We're supposed to combine all of these. And this is the way of our Prophet ﷺ, that he was the most disciplined person in human existence ﷺ. And the Sahaba were very disciplined. But at the same time that they weren't robots. They were very human. And I think that one of the things that actually gave me solace is when I read something in the words of Imam Sha'rani. Because this actually bothered me. Not like, in a sense, like I just wondered, like, why are Muslims so undisciplined? Right? Why do they lack discipline like this? And I just didn't know the answer. Imam Sha'rani brought an amazing point. That he thought of it in the context of going astray from being too exoteric or being too esoteric. And that we know that there's examples of those who have gone astray by being too exoteric, too focused on the outward dimension, or being too esoteric. And so, generally speaking, when Muslims go to an extreme, we won't use the word extreme, we'll use the word extreme. Generally speaking, when we go to extreme, what do? Are we more esoteric or exoteric? Exoteric. There's no doubt. That yes, there's been certain sects that have gone astray, but generally speaking, if we stray in one way or another, it's towards being too exoteric. And that Imam Sha'rani says, he said, this is a mercy of Allah Ta'ala to the Prophet, upon the Prophet's community. Because that it's much easier to correct and it's much less dangerous to be too exoteric as opposed to being too esoteric. Because when you become too esoteric, that it's very difficult to correct that. If you really believe something that a triunion God, Thalith Thalat, like how do you correct that? It's not logical to begin with. That if you believe certain things about the unseen, but there's no practical way to deal with that. That's more dangerous, right? When things in the realm of belief and the unseen, things of this nature, than it is to that be more exoteric. So that brought me a lot of solace to think of things in that way. That it's actually a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it doesn't mean that we don't call ourselves to that greater discipline. And if you want a practical book to help you with discipline, Bidayat al-Hidayah by Imam Ghazali. Read Bidayat al-Hidayah. That it will teach you how to organize your day, your week, your month, and your year. And so I believe that the way that we become more disciplined is by organizing our time correctly. That you figure out what you want to do in what time, and then you force yourself to do it. And you take yourself to task when you don't do it. And don't overburden yourself. Start little by little. The first thing, get your prayers straight in your life. That's the number one thing. Make sure you're praying all 5 daily prayers. Second step, on time. Third step, that in congregation. That's the biggest priority of all. Get your prayers straight. And then you start slowly adding, after that, little by little, until that you have your time arranged well, that you have a time that you do different things at different times of the week. And the blessing is in doing that. And so that discipline, though, is very, very important. And those that learn to discipline themselves, that they have great things, come to them. There's a lot of khair that comes from discipline.
Jazakallah khair, Shaykh Yahya. We're gonna conclude with the final question that I'll ask, and this question serves two purposes. One is that as all of you know, the term 3 opened this week on our online academy, and mashallah, last term we had over 10,000 registrants to various courses, and I think one of the great needs that students have who are beginning on the path of knowledge or continuing on the path of knowledge is an encouragement and a kind of like a muqaddama, an introduction to the things that they should be taking care of, intentions with which they should be beginning a course of study, and maybe some practical advice on how to make sure that as they go through a 10 or 12-week course of study, how they can maintain not just the energy that they had at the beginning, but how they can continue to derive benefit even after the course of study is finished. So I'm going to ask Shaykh Yahya to maybe give a few words, 7 or 8 minutes, on sort of introducing and welcoming and advising those students. It might be many of you here as well, who are in the process of beginning such a course of study, and what kind of advice you would have for them at the beginning of that study. And inshallah, after Shaykh Yahya concludes, we'll ask him to make dua, and we'll conclude formally for the night. So I'm going to ask Shaykh Yahya, take it from there.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. From the blessing of Allah, from the time that I became Muslim, I was able to study the deen. Very early on, after I converted, I had enormously, great opportunities to study. Started with a class that I took with the Sheikh I became Muslim with, Sheikh Yahya, and Sheikh Hamza Yusuf was the translator. And there was a pull that sacred knowledge had that was very powerful. I had always learned and studied a lot before that, and I always got fairly good grades in school, but there wasn't a love and desire for what I was doing. It was something more utilitarian. You do it because you want to get a job and you want to be successful. There was a pull and there was a beauty and a blessing in sacred knowledge that was very powerful. And it was something that I wasn't able to control. And I remember first studying the Matan of Ibn Ashar, by Sidi Abdul Wahid Ibn Ashar, Matan al-Murshid al-Mu'in, and that literally you could feel your heart come to life. There's something about sacred knowledge that it's coated with light, that it brings your heart to life. There's something special about this type of knowledge. This is the type of knowledge that helps you contextualize all other types of knowledge. This is the type of knowledge that will help you to truly understand and get the benefit from all other types of knowledge. And one of the great things about the Mauritanian scholars that I was initially introduced to was that they are people that really appreciate knowledge. And when I went on to actually study there in Mauritania, that there's something about the people that when you spend time with them is that you just have this deep love and appreciation and exaltation of knowledge, that you realize its importance. And it's something that they emphasize so much by the way that they treat the people of knowledge, by the way they themselves that embark upon paths of seeking sacred knowledge, that is really inspiring. And so to me, the greatest way that we can become inspired to seek sacred knowledge is to truly appreciate and know that the great nature of the people who have this knowledge and what it is that they can attain. And that the primary reason that we study sacred knowledge is that it is the best and the fastest way for us to have a heart that draws near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and comes to know Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, and will then seek the fruits of the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala insofar as it relates to every other aspect of their life. In other words, that this is the knowledge that will help cure your anxiety. This is the knowledge that will help cure the torpidity of the heart. This is the knowledge that will help you learn how to interact with other people. This is the knowledge that will help you control your anger. This is the knowledge that will help you have a perspective of life that allows you to deal with that situation when you lose your job at work. This is the knowledge that will help you that appreciate the newest marvel in invention, the newest marvel of science, the newest invention in technology. This is the knowledge that is your lifeline to everything that we experience as human beings in existence. And this is why this is the most precious thing of all, is to embark upon a path to learn this type of knowledge. And one of the lines of poetry that I took just as I was leaving Mauritania on my way to Tarim in the year 2000 was one of the great scholars there who had studied for many years with my teacher, Marabat al-Hajj. His name was Marabat Muhammad Zain, that he gave me a few lines of poetry as I was leaving, and they remain with me to this day. And they are that اجعل العلم عذرا للأشياء ولا تجعل الأشياء عذرا للعلم. Make knowledge an excuse for other things, and do not make other things an excuse for knowledge. In other words, that when you wake up in the morning, the first thing if you want to do is that to look at your WhatsApp chats, or to look at who texted you, or open up your email, or check your Facebook page, or send a tweet, then think twice. Maybe the first thing that you can do after making dhikr is to read something of beneficial knowledge. That make knowledge an excuse for other things. In other words, I can't do that right now because I have to learn. And sprinkle throughout your day opportunities for you to learn, whether you're in the car, or whether you have a book near your nightstand, or whether you listen to something on your way to work, or whether you have a book at work just as you sit down, you read one hadith. Sprinkle knowledge throughout your day. Make it an excuse for other things. And don't make other things an excuse for knowledge. وَاعْلَمْ بِأَنَّ الْعِلْمَ وَالْعِبَادَ هُمَا يَقِينًا سَبَبَ السَّعَادَةِ. Know for certain that knowledge and worship are the two means of felicity. This is what life is all about. And both words go right hand in hand. Ilm and amal. Ayn lam mim, ayn mim lam. They go right in hand, one to another. This is why Allah created the heavens and the earth, according to Imam Ghazali. لِتَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ أَحَاطَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عِلْمًا. And then the verse in the Quran that we all know, that I have not created that jinn or ins, the humankind, except that they may worship me, to know me. And so then the final lines of poetry state that وَذَا الْمُبَقَّ لَكَ بَعْدَ الْمَوْتِ فَالصَّفِّهِ وَزَمْهُ قَبْلَ فَوْتِ. This is what is going to remain for you, that after you pass. And so purify it and adhere to it. And so that knowledge is the crown achievement of humankind, is for us to attain knowledge. And that of all the things in the Quran, this is what Allah Ta'ala commanded our Prophet to ask for. وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. And say that, oh Allah, oh Lord, increase me in knowledge. And so that knowledge has a beginning and it has an end. And two practical points here of advice. The first one is, if you sit down to learn, you'll notice that it's different than watching TV or playing on some type of device. Is that if you're tired, you can still watch TV, unless you're really tired. If you're tired, you can still have a conversation, have coffee with your friend. But you'll notice if you're tired and you sit down to study, all of a sudden, you get really tired. This is your nafs. My advice is, when it comes to that, is that don't just give up the first time you get tired. You won't attain much knowledge that way. That be patient, exert yourself, and what you'll find is that tiredness goes away, and you'll get energy. And then after you have energy, that you'll get tired a second time. Don't give in. If you give in then, you'll attain something, but you'll still lack. That be patient, and that second tiredness will go away, and you'll get a third round of energy. And then you go for a period of time, and then you get tired. Then you're really tired, and you reach the point now where your brain feels like jello, where thoughts are no longer sticking. And that you need to rest at this point, and then rest. But don't give up the first time you get tired. You won't attain much knowledge. If you give up the second time that you get tired, you'll attain a little bit more, but you'll still be lacking in terms of what you can attain. That do it until you get tired the third time, and it's only when you're able to then spend hours of really in-depth study and reading and comparing your notes and so forth, is that you'll start to feel like you're in gardens of paradise. And if we can cultivate that yourself, because of all the different desires, now the love of knowledge, it exists within all of us, but it's the most subtle. It has to be cultivated. And once it's cultivated, that when you come to love and appreciate knowledge in this way, the difficulty now is to actually get you to spend your time doing something else, to realize that you have other obligations to do other than just study. The last piece of advice is that every student of knowledge should have a notebook with them at all times. Every time that you hear something of benefit, write it down. Every time you hear something of benefit, write it down. Every time you hear something of benefit, write it down. Collect notes. And there's different ways that you have of doing that. Oftentimes people now have electronic notes. Written handbooks oftentimes are better. And then if you want to transfer those to where you've written them down on some type of Word document or something of that nature, that's also a good thing to do. But taking good notes is really important, because those pieces of knowledge that Allah gives you, that when you're sincere in your path of knowledge, it's a manifestation of what our Prophet tells us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that whoever sets out on a path seeking to seek sacred knowledge, that Allah will facilitate a path for him to paradise. That knowledge that Allah has given you is an outward manifestation of your path to paradise, because that's what Allah has given you. He didn't stipulate that you become a scholar. He stipulated that you set out on a path to seek sacred knowledge. And so that knowledge that your Lord gives you is that outward manifestation of your path to felicity. And that you catch it and you trap it by putting the pen to paper. And then that you bring it to life by reviewing it. And that this is what life is about. And that sometimes you have to review notes you took 10 years ago or 15, 20 years ago. And that this is why that they say that hayat al-ilm al-mudhakara, the life of knowledge is reviewing it and that bringing it back to life. And then it becomes that an exhilarating feeling that when someone's talking about something that you actually know, because that knowledge becomes a part of you, and that there's a relationship of possession. And so may Allah Ta'ala bring our hearts to life with knowledge. May Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala bless all of those that will be taking classes this semester. May they all have great openings. May they have deep blessings, and a lot of blessings come to them from their studies. May Allah Ta'ala bless us all with understanding, and bless us to memorize the knowledge that we study. Bless us to put it into practice, and bless us to have it be translated into traits of character that are pleasing to Him Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, and ultimately lead to that experiential knowledge of Him Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. May Allah Ta'ala bless everyone at SeekersHub Global, wherever they might be on the face of this earth, and bless us all, even though that we be taking part in this activity in a cyber fashion, to gather us all, inshallah ta'ala, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and that all of the individual pursuits of knowledge may be pleasing to our Prophet ﷺ, pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and may be a means to bring life to the deen in this time, and a means for the renewal of the teachings of Sayyidina Muhammad ﷺ in the century in which we live. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.